The morning my lawyer leaned across the table and said, "Something isn't right here." I thought he was talking about the paperwork. I didn't realize he was talking about my son. I should back up. My name is Ray. Well, Raymond. But nobody's called me that since my mother passed. I'm 61 years old. I spent 34 years working as a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm in Hamilton, Ontario. Not glamorous, but solid. The kind of work that lets you pay off a house, put 2 kids through university, and still have something left over at the end of it all. My wife, Barbara, we called her Bev, she was a dental hygienist. Between the two of us, we built something real. Nothing flashy, just real. Bev died 18 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that part because even now, if I start talking about it too long, I lose the thread of everything else. What I'll say is this: she was the kind of person who made other people better, just by being in the room. And when she left, the room got very quiet. She left behind a will. We'd made them together years ago, updated them when my older son was born, updated them again after our daughter came along. The house was to go to me, her RRSP, her savings account, her jewelry, split between the kids, with me as executor. Nothing complicated. We weren't complicated people. The trouble started about 6 weeks after the funeral. My older son, I'll call him my son, because that's what he is to me, even now. He's 34. He lives about 40 minutes away in Oakville with his wife and their 2 kids. Smart man. Always was. Graduated from McMaster with a business degree, works in finance. He's the kind of person who knows what a T4 is before you even finish asking the question. After Bev died, he stepped in immediately. "Dad, you shouldn't have to deal with all this right now. Let me handle the paperwork, the estate stuff. You just rest." And I let him. God help me, I let him. My daughter lives in Fredericton. She's 28, works as a nurse. She flew in for the funeral, stayed for 10 days, cooked every meal, sat with me through the evenings when the silence got too heavy. She never once asked what she was getting. She just showed up and stayed until I told her I was going to be okay. Then she went home because she had shifts to cover and a life to get back to. Before she left, she said, "Dad, call me every day if you need to. I mean it." And I said I would, and mostly I did. My son drove down the week after she left, and we sat at the kitchen table and he spread everything out. The will, the accounts statements, the property documents. He'd already spoken to the estate lawyer, the one Bev and I had used for years, a man named Fletcher who worked out of a small office on King Street. My son said Fletcher was a bit slow and that he'd found someone better, more efficient. He had a name and a business card, and I was still so numb from everything that I just nodded. Looking back, I should have called Fletcher myself. But grief does something to your judgment. It makes you grateful for anyone who will just take the wheel for a while. The estate process started moving along, and I stopped paying attention to it the way I should have. My son would call with updates. "Dad, we filed this. Dad, we need your signature on that." I'd sign, he'd scan things and email them. I didn't read everything the way I should have. I trusted him. He was my son. He knew more about this stuff than I did. That's what I told myself every time I felt a small pull of something I couldn't name. Not suspicion exactly. Just a faint sense that things were moving in a direction I wasn't fully tracking. Bev's savings account had a balance of just over $94,000. She'd been careful her whole life, put money away every month even when it wasn't easy. That money was supposed to go, according to the will, 60% to my son and 40% to my daughter. My son had explained that, as executor, he would facilitate the transfers once probate cleared. Fine. That made sense to me. It was my daughter who first said something. She called me on a Sunday afternoon in late October. The leaves were already down, the yard looked bare, and she said, "Dad, I got a letter from the estate lawyer, not Fletcher, the new one my brother found. It says the savings account transfer was finalized." I said, "Okay, that sounds right." She was quiet for a moment. "Dad, it says the full amount was transferred, but there's no mention of my portion." I told her there was probably just a delay, that these things take time, she said. "I've been waiting 3 months. Fletcher would have had this done in 6 weeks." I didn't have a good answer for that. I said I'd look into it. When I called my son, he was calm. He explained that there had been some administrative overlap, that the figures would be reconciled, that I shouldn't worry about it. He used words like allocation and processing lag. He sounded like he was reading from a manual. I hung up and sat in the kitchen for a long time staring at the wall. The next week, I called Fletcher myself. He was surprised to hear from me. Apparently, my son had told him. The family had decided to use a different firm for the estate. Fletcher was gracious about it, didn't say anything negative, but he asked if everything was going smoothly, and something about the way he asked it made me say, "Actually, I'm not sure." He suggested I come in. I went on a Wednesday. I brought everything I had, the copies my son had given me, the account statements I could access online, the letters from the new lawyer. Fletcher and I sat down together and he went through it all. He's a quiet man, methodical. He doesn't say things quickly. He reads, he thinks, he asks a question, and then he reads some more. We were about 40 minutes in when he sat back in his chair and looked at me over his glasses and said very quietly, "Ray, something isn't right here." He showed me what he'd found. The transfer from Bev's savings account, all $94,000, had been processed through the estate to a single recipient, my son. The documentation indicated that my daughter's portion had been folded into administrative costs and estate management fees. Fees that, according to the paperwork, were owed to a numbered company. Fletcher looked up the numbered company. It had been registered 8 months ago. The sole director was my son's wife. I didn't say anything for a long time. Fletcher waited. He's good at that. Finally, I said, "Is that legal?" He said it shouldn't have been possible, but someone structured it very carefully. I drove home that afternoon on the 403, and I don't remember most of the drive. I kept thinking about Bev, about how hard she'd worked, how careful she'd been, how much she'd wanted to leave something real for both of our kids. And I thought about my daughter in Fredericton, working nights, calling me every few days to see if I was eating properly, and never once asking when her money was coming. I thought about my son helping me with the paperwork at the kitchen table, how he'd made it feel like a kindness. I called my daughter that night. I didn't tell her everything yet. I just asked her a few questions, whether she'd received any documentation about the fees, whether she'd signed anything related to the estate settlement. She hadn't. Nobody had asked her to sign anything. She hadn't even been contacted by the new lawyer except for that one letter saying the transfer was finalized. She said, "Dad, you're scaring me." I said, "I'm going to figure this out." I hired Fletcher, formally this time, and I told him I wanted to understand exactly what had happened and what our options were. What he uncovered over the next several weeks was this. My son had identified himself, through the new lawyer, a man who it turned out did most of his business with a small circle of clients who were mostly referrals from each other, as co-executor of the estate. He wasn't. Bev's will named me as sole executor. But the new lawyer had been given documents that suggested a co-executor arrangement had been established after the original will was drafted. Those documents bore my signature. I had never seen those documents before. Fletcher flagged the signatures for review. I told him clearly that I had not signed those specific forms and did not recall any meeting where such an arrangement was discussed. He brought in a document examiner. Not cheap, but necessary. The examiner concluded that the signatures, while similar to mine, showed inconsistencies under magnification. The paper stock and the font on the forms also didn't match the other documents from the same supposed period. I'll be honest with you. Sitting in Fletcher's office and hearing that laid out in plain language was one of the worst moments of my life. Not because I was surprised exactly. By then I had stopped being surprised, but because it made it real in a way that couldn't be undone. My son had forged my signature. He had routed my wife's life savings through a company his wife controlled. He had deliberately cut his sister out of what her mother had intended for her. The night I figured all this out completely, I sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd sat together and he'd spread out all that paperwork and I'd trusted him. And I didn't cry. I thought I would. But I didn't. I just sat there with a cup of tea that went cold and thought about 34 years. 34 years of driving him to hockey practice and helping him study for exams and standing in the rain at his convocation and dancing with Bev at his wedding. 34 years. And then I thought about my daughter, and I picked up the phone. I told her everything, all of it. I expected her to cry. She didn't either. She was quiet for a minute, and then she said, "Dad, what do you need me to do?" That's who she is. Fletcher advised me on next steps. In Ontario, forging documents in an estate matter is a serious legal issue. He referred the matter to a litigation lawyer who specializes in estate disputes, a woman who had handled similar cases before. She was direct. She said, "This is fraud. It's also a breach of fiduciary duty, given the way he positioned himself in the estate. We have grounds. We filed a claim." I also reported the matter to the Law Society of Ontario, regarding the lawyer who had processed the paperwork. The one who had accepted documents he should have verified, who had not contacted me directly to confirm the co-executor arrangement, and who had transferred funds to a private company without proper due diligence. Fletcher told me that lawyers have an obligation to their clients, but also to the administration of justice. This man had failed on both counts. My son called me when he found out legal proceedings had started. I almost didn't answer, but I did. I let him talk for about 3 minutes. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He said the fees were legitimate. He said my daughter had always been difficult about money. He said Bev would have wanted things settled quickly and efficiently. I let him finish. And then I said, "Your mother wanted things split equally. It said so in the will she signed. You knew that." He started to say something about the cost of managing the estate, the time he'd put in, the fact that he'd done all the heavy lifting. I said, "You forged my name." There was a long pause, and then the call ended. That was 7 months ago. The litigation is ongoing. I'm not going to pretend it's been easy. Court processes in Ontario move at their own pace, and estate litigation can take time. But Fletcher tells me the evidence is clear and our position is strong. The numbered company was dissolved shortly after the funds transferred, which looks exactly as bad as it sounds. The litigation lawyer says she's seen this before, that it almost always ends the same way. My daughter flew in last month, not for anything legal, just to visit. We went for a long walk along the escarpment trail, and she brought sandwiches, the same kind Bev used to make, which I hadn't told her but she remembered anyway. We didn't talk about the case the whole afternoon. We talked about her work, her apartment, her cat, a show she'd been watching. It was just a normal afternoon between a father and his daughter. On the drive home, she said, "I'm not doing this for the money, Dad. I want you to know that." I said, "I know," she said. "I'm doing it because Mum worked hard her whole life and what he did was wrong, and because he tried to make it look like maybe it was me." That last part, yes. Among the administrative documentation, there had been a note suggesting my daughter had been difficult to reach and had informally deferred her portion to facilitate estate settlement. She had never said any such thing. She hadn't been asked. He had tried to turn suspicion toward her and away from himself. The daughter who came every few days when her mother was sick. The one who flew across the country for the funeral and stayed to make sure I was eating. The one who never asked what she was getting. I've thought a lot about how I let this happen. About the paperwork I should have read more carefully. The lawyer I should have called sooner. The small nagging feeling I kept talking myself out of. Grief is real, and it does real things to your ability to pay attention. But I've also had to sit with the part that wasn't grief. The part that was just me, assuming that because my son was good with money, and good at seeming capable, he was also good, that those things were the same. They weren't. They were never the same. Bev used to say that the ones who need the least applause are usually the ones doing the most work. I didn't understand what she meant until after she was gone. She was talking about our daughter. She'd always known. If you've got aging parents, or if you are one, here's what I'd tell you. Keep your own lawyer, the one you've always had. Don't let anyone tell you there's someone better or more efficient without you making that call yourself. Read everything before you sign it. If something is moving too fast, slow it down. The paperwork will wait. And the child who shows up quietly and doesn't ask what they're getting is almost never the one you need to worry about. The other thing I'd say is this. Trust is a reasonable thing to give, but grief is not a good time to give it without limits. I learned that the hard way. I hope you don't have to. Fletcher is still on King Street. He was patient and he was careful and he saw what I couldn't see. I'll be grateful for that for the rest of my life. Sometimes the person who slows down and reads the fine print is the one who saves everything that matters. I still sit in the kitchen sometimes in the evenings, still drink tea that goes a little cold because I forget about it. The house is still quiet, but it's a different kind of quiet now. Less like something missing, more like something waiting. My daughter calls every few days. We're planning Christmas together. Her, me, her cat, apparently. She says the cat is non-negotiable. I believe her. And whatever the courts decide, whatever amount comes back or doesn't, I already know what my wife left behind that mattered most. It wasn't in any account. It wasn't in any will. It was in the daughter who flew home without being asked, who made the same sandwiches without being reminded, and who said, when everything was falling apart, "What do you need me to do?" That was Bev's real inheritance. And nobody forged that.